Badan Pangan Dunia atau FAO mencatat pada tahun 2021 penderita kurang gizi di seluruh dunia mencapai sekitar 767 juta orang. Nah, dari jumlah tersebut, mayoritas atau 425 juta orang diantaranya berada di Asia. Nah, dalam laporan bertajuk The State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, Indonesia tercatat sebagai negara dengan jumlah penduduk kurang gizi tertinggi di kawasan Asia Tenggara dengan jumlah 17,7 juta orang. Kurang gizi atau malanutrisi menyebabkan berbagai masalah kesehatan yang bisa berujung pada kematian. Lalu, apa yang bisa kita lakukan untuk mengatasi malanutrisi ini? Insight akan membahasnya. Bersama saya, Desi Anwar.
Menaikkan angka konsumsi nutrisi di Indonesia merupakan salah satu misi utama pemerintah agar terciptanya masyarakat Indonesia yang sehat dan produktif. Pemerintah Indonesia sendiri sudah memiliki target untuk menaikkan pencegahan malnutrisi pada anak balita sebesar 7% dan mencegah stunting di antara anak-anak di bawah usia 2 tahun sebesar 14% pada tahun 2024. Ahli gizi dari Persatuan Ahli Gizi Indonesia, Dr. Atmarita mengatakan saat ini Indonesia menghadapi 3 beban malnutrisi, yaitu kekurangan gizi, kelebihan gizi, serta defisiensi mikronutrien. Kekurangan gizi mencakup kekurangan berat badan atau underweight, berat badan rendah menurut usia, kerdil atau stunting, tinggi badan rendah menurut usia, dan kurus atau wasting, berat badan rendah menurut tinggi badan. Sementara kelebihan gizi mencakup kegemukan atau overweight dan obesitas. Edukasi mengenai gizi seimbang penting disampaikan dan dipahami oleh semua anak di setiap tingkat usia. Itulah mengapa pemahaman akan masalah gizi harus dimulai dari lingkup masyarakat paling kecil, yaitu keluarga.
Menurut FAO, kurang gizi adalah kondisi di mana konsumsi makanan harian seseorang itu tidak mencukupi standar kebutuhan energi. Efek dari malanutrisi ini tentu saja beragam, mulai dari anak-anak yang terlahir dengan kondisi stunting atau kondisi kelebihan berat badan yang kita sebut sebagai obesitas, hingga tubuh kekurangan sel darah merah atau anemia. Yang juga tidak kalah penting adalah ancaman nutrisi yang disebabkan oleh isu perubahan iklim. Akibat dampaknya tentu saja pada ketahanan pangan dunia. Nah, untuk membahasnya lebih lanjut, di studio sudah ada Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition atau GAIN. Lawrence, great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome to Jakarta.
Thank you. It's great to be back here again.
And GAIN, now, tell us a little bit. What is GAIN? And what does it do, and particularly with Indonesia, what are you working on and who do you partner with?
Desi, let me start out with the big picture. So it's a bit of a grim picture at the moment. We've got about 800 million people who are hungry globally. We've got 2 billion people who don't get enough micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals like zinc and iron. Then we've got 3 billion people globally who can't afford a healthy diet. So when we look at the faces of malnutrition, it depends where you are. They have different faces. They could be diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, anemia, wasting, which is children that are skin and bone, and stunting, which are children, essentially, you think they're maybe 8 or 9, and you think they're 5 or 6, and they're really 8 or 9. They're very short for their height. And at the center of all of those faces of malnutrition is poor diets. So GAIN, this is what GAIN focuses on. We focus on making safe and nutritious foods more available in the market, more affordable. They may be in the market, but people can't afford them. And actually, they may be available and affordable, but they're not very attractive. They're not very desirable or delicious. So we work on all 3 of those aspects globally in 10 countries. Here in Indonesia, we are working on a whole range of things. We won an award just recently at the Dubai Expo for our work in Indonesia on preventing post-capture fish losses. Fish is such an important food in Indonesia, and for nutrition it's vital, and it's vital for the environment as well. So about 60% of the fish that was captured was being lost, and so we worked with businesses, we worked with the government, we worked with civil society. That's how we tend to work in alliances, and we pulled them all together and we created a fantastic network with lots of innovations of small businesses, mobile refrigeration units that can be strapped to bicycles to go to the last mile community with fresh fish. So that's the kind of thing we do.
Okay, and well, there's a lot there, food for thought. We need to pass it bit by bit later, but this is a global alliance. Tell me, alliance between who and where do you get your funding, and how do you work together with the countries where your alliance, where GAIN actually is present?
So we have, we take the word alliance very seriously, and we have sort of global partners, and then we have alliances in each country. Very often alliances for each problem we face, because malnutrition it's caused by so many powerful malevolent factors coming together. It needs powerful alliances to overcome it. So our global partners are organizations like CARE, like the World Wildlife Foundation, these kinds of partners. But actually the more interesting...
How about FAO, is that part of you?
FAO is World Food Programme, WHO. There's too many to really list all of them here, but and of course governments are our key partners as well.
And the funding come from?
The funding comes from the aid donors, the multilaterals, the bilateral governments, the Dutch, the Irish, the Germans, the Swiss, US, Canada, foundations, Rockefeller Foundation, Children's Investment Fund Foundation, Gates Foundation, these kinds of places. The alliances within countries are really the most, I would say, most impactful, because, for example, this example I gave you about fish losses, reducing fish losses post-capture, we formed an alliance of key partners to make things happen. We also work on things like fortification. How do we fortify rice, and how do we fortify wheat and maize around the world? And that also requires alliances of consumer groups, businesses, and governments. We work on shifting demand preferences. That means working with, again, consumers, supermarkets, researchers, behavioral scientists. That's the way to do it in this world.
Okay, so particularly with Indonesia, I mean, the government obviously is very much a partner in all this. But how does GAIN work? Do you have projects that you fund, and how do you measure? What does success look like? Like, for example, working together to minimize or to reduce fish losses. How does that actually work? And all the other stuff that you do.
Well, the ultimate goal of all of our projects is to improve the quality of diet. And so we develop metrics that help us assess that. Diet diversity is one key way of looking at that. The more diverse a diet, the better it is for you. And sometimes it's as simple as more colors on the plate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all of our projects have that metric, and we can add it up at a global level. Sorry, I forgot the other part of your question, Desi.
No, when you're in Indonesia, so who do you actually sit down with, particularly on, for example, fish losses? Do you work together with the local, with the fisheries ministry?
Yeah, the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. And Ministry of Health. Obviously very important.
And you give advice, do you fund projects?
What we end up doing is we say to the ministry, what are your priorities over the next 3 or 4 years? How can we support them? They say, we'd like you to work in this area or this area on this issue or on that issue. We will then raise our funding from other sources outside of Indonesia, bring them here, working with partners in the particular area. It could be a civil society group, it could be a research organization, it could be some local businesses. And we will run essentially a pilot, and the pilot will maybe reach 100,000 people or 200,000 people. If it's successful, we'll get someone else to evaluate it. We can't evaluate our own projects. If it's successful, we then work with government to scale it and build it into policy. Or another way of scaling it is to scale it with businesses.
Okay. Can you give an example of one of the successful, one of your best practices, so to speak?
Yeah, one of the things we're very
in Indonesia.
Yes, no, one of the things we're very proud of is this so-called Emo-Demo.
Emo-Demo, okay.
Emo-Demo, emotional demonstration.
Emotional demonstration. So that's a thing now, emo-demo.
That is a thing. That is a thing. And it started here, and I think it's going to take off around the world. The idea is often mothers or carers of very young children, it's very difficult to feed young children. It's very time intensive.
I'm sure.
And the foods they need...
Young children are very picky eaters.
And you can get it wrong very easily. Condensed milk is actually not great for your kid at a very young age. It's an easy mistake to make. So we're always trying to... Sometimes income is not the big constraint. Sometimes families have enough income to buy healthy food for their kids. They just lack the proper education, the proper messaging.
Make the right choices.
To make the right choices.
What kind of food.
That's because sometimes the messaging we give them, it's not their fault. Sometimes the messaging is too complicated. Or too left.
Although the advertising is also
well, the advertising is like, you know, a massive wave of bad information coming at you. But very often the messaging that's trying to promote good food is very, you know, left brain. It's very logical.
Yeah.
I don't know. My own kids, I was trying to get them to eat healthier food. I would say, you should eat this. It's really good for you.
And they go, why, Daddy?
And they just roll their eyes at me.
Yeah, who eats Brussels sprouts?
So that's not the way to communicate. You need more right brain.
You need more emo-demo, which is on the right brain.
Emo is emotional.
Yeah.
Emotional. So an example, we would, working in the Posyandu's, we would buy some chips or cheese puffs that were easily available, very low cost, very tasty, kids clamoring for them, dissolve them in a cup of water with a group of mothers and parents sitting around, dissolve it in a cup of water, you see this oil slick on the top of a cup, you smell this, all these chemicals coming off, and it elicits that kind of response, a sort of a recoiling response from the mothers, and it registers with them that this is bad.
That is a very, very good way to put, you know, people off, particularly young children, off really unhealthy snacks. You know, lovely colors and they smell good and everything, and then you show them what it's actually made of, and it's like very yucky. Okay, Lawrence, this is very, very interesting because, you know, health and nutrition at the end of the day, you know, this is like the basic fundamentals of life. Without health, without good nutrition, you know, everything is basically, can't do anything, it's pointless. Okay, we'll take a little break, but we will continue after this break. Insight with Desi Anwar akan segera kembali, tetaplah bersama kami. Bersama Insight with Desi Anwar, saya ditemani Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of GAIN, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, atau membahas ya masalah tentang nutrisi dan juga tentu saja makanan yang sehat. Now, Lawrence, nutritious, tasty, affordable, I mean, this should all be, you know, our basic right as a human being. I mean, because without them, we will not grow up, we will not be healthy, productive individuals. But just to kind of open it up a bit and look at, since that you're a global alliance, the global situation, and you mentioned about, you know, the 800 million people who are now, you know, hungry, 2 billion don't have access to nutritious food, and 3 billion who, you know, not eating what they're supposed to eat now. Could you give us a sense of, you know, the maps, the pockets, where are they, and particularly Southeast Asia and Indonesia, where are we in terms of this map? You know, do we have access to nutritious, tasty, healthy, but affordable food? And where in the world do we see, particularly, and this is very pertinent to our present condition. We've just had the pandemic, and we're still going through the pandemic in the last 3 years. Of course, that impacted the global food system, I would imagine, and the war in the Ukraine. We've talked about, you know, the wheat coming out of the Ukraine and all the other, you know, food stuff that got clogged up because of the war. Tell us a little bit about what we look like.
So there are kind of two types of malnutrition. There's this sort of deprivation malnutrition. You don't have enough food, don't have enough health care, don't have enough water and sanitation that's good quality. And this is kind of the classic malnutrition that you would see 50...
So the famine in Africa kind of images, like kwashiorkor.
And then there's the kind of the malnutrition of imbalance. And this is where people have enough food, but they're eating the wrong food or not enough of the right food. And this is, this leads to things like obesity and diabetes and hypertension. Many countries now, middle-income countries especially, have both of these types. And some communities have the same, and some families have both, and some individuals have both. They're both deficient in some things, and they're consuming too much of other things. And Indonesia really has this mix. We call it sometimes the double burden or the triple burden of malnutrition. So the countries that are most experiencing this sort of deficit form of malnutrition, this deprivation form, mostly in South Asia, some in sub-Saharan Africa, some in West Africa, some in East. These tend to be more poverty-driven. The countries that are experiencing the more sort of imbalanced is pretty much every country in the world. I live in the UK. The UK is suffering from 33% of adults in the UK are obese. I mean, it's extraordinary.
And I would imagine in the US it would be even more.
It's even higher in the US. So, every country, I always say no country has a monopoly on good nutrition, and no country has a monopoly on the solutions to good nutrition. So it's a global problem. What has COVID and Ukraine done? COVID has really turned the clock back about 10 years. It's, when you think about what COVID has done, there are three routes. First route is health systems became overwhelmed with COVID cases, and a lot of the nutrition programs are delivered through the health system. So basic nutrition programs are not getting to the kids and mothers who needed them. Second thing COVID did was to wreck the food system. Lockdowns especially meant that food was piling up over here and rotting and not getting to the markets where it was needed. So this was a big problem. And the third problem was there was an income collapse because people couldn't work. A lot of people were laid off. If you didn't live in a country that had a good social security program, tough. And so without income to buy food and other things that are good for nutrition, without access to food, without access to these health programs, malnutrition rates have gone up by about 20% in the last 2 years. And it took about 10 or 15 years to get a 20% decline previous to COVID. So it's literally turned the clock back about 10 or 15 years. And Ukraine is just exacerbating this. Again, against a backdrop of climate change, steadily ratcheting up the stakes.
That is an issue in itself.
So Ukraine has, really, it's really, the numbers are scary. COVID has affected hunger. It's gone up from about 700 million to 800 million. I fully expect, we haven't got the hunger numbers in to reflect Ukraine yet, but with food prices at an all-time high, I fully expect the hunger numbers to go up by another 50 to 100 million to maybe 900 million globally. So it's grim.
What is GAIN? Do you have a particular program in order to overcome these, stepping back by 10 years?
Absolutely. I mean, we put together a program called Keeping Food Markets Working. So we said, what's the big problem here? Food markets are not working. So the first thing we did was say, we know health workers are really vital. For frontline health workers are vital. And in my country, in the UK, there was a weekly applause for health workers because of the incredible things they were doing. But food workers are also incredibly important. People growing the food, moving the food, selling the food, marketing the food. So we put in place, as soon as COVID hit in February, March 2020, we put in place a series of programs to help food workers in farming and food processing places to give them extra food and extra healthy food and really good nutrition messaging and to help them
that's
do
working.
that. So that's working brilliantly. Second thing we did was a lot of food markets, wet markets especially, were shutting down because there were all these now verified rumors that it was the wet market in Wuhan
that caused
this. So a lot of the wet markets were closing down. There was no protocol. Municipal authorities were spooked. So we said, well, we can help develop the protocols to keep these markets opening, the distancing protocols, the mask wearing protocols, the hand washing, all that stuff. And so we worked with WHO, and we developed a whole set of protocols and applied them to about 10 big food markets in the countries we work in. The third really important thing we did was to get finance to small and medium enterprises. Small and medium enterprises are the backbone of food systems for poor people and low-income people. But they don't have the ability to ride out crises like the bigger companies do. They have no reserves of operating capital. And they're too big for micro lending and too small for the big banks. So we set up a facility called the Nutritious Food Financing Facility to get funding to those companies. And it wasn't much. It was about $10 million.
Is this also something that you're doing with Indonesia?
Exactly, yes. So these three things we did in Indonesia.
The small and particularly the micro enterprise, they're the most affected, obviously. I mean, poverty levels have gone down, and of course, like I said, in the government budget, a lot of it actually has to focus in trying to overcome the pandemic. So I think it's a very important work that I think, like GAIN is doing in order to help overcome some of these issues. We'll take another break, Lawrence, but we still have a lot to discuss in this program. Tetaplah bersama kami, Insight with Desi Anwar akan segera kembali. Insight with Desi Anwar. Saya ditemani Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition atau GAIN. Perbincangan kita mengenai bagaimana memperbaiki nutrisi dalam makanan, karena ini merupakan salah satu dari masalah yang kita hadapi sekarang. Banyak sekali makanan tapi tidak ada nutrisinya, dan justru yang terjadi adalah malanutrisi dan juga obesitas. Dan Indonesia juga merupakan salah satu negara yang ternyata memiliki masalah dalam nutrisinya. And Lawrence, we talked a little bit about causes. Poverty, you mentioned, is one of them, of course, and also the pandemic and the war in the Ukraine have set things back over a decade. But if you see the last few decades and the kind of foods that our parents, or even I'm quite old, so what the stuff that I used to eat when I was young, and now there is some kind of sort of evolution, which correct me if I'm wrong, it's also linked to basically globalization and the way that our food is being grown, produced, packaged, manufactured and distributed around the world. And could you tell us a little bit how the impact of the food systems and the producing, buying, selling, advertising this food that is actually creating the problem that we have now, where if we go to a supermarket, for example, it's like shelves full of packaged foods, all sorts of things, and yet at the same time, people are getting sick from, bad diet. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's a very interesting aspect about our modern life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really, all your points are spot on, Desi. When I started doing this quite a while ago, back in the late 80s, and at that point in time, we used to think that income growth was a good thing. It would reduce malnutrition, slowly, unevenly, but it would reduce malnutrition. You get into the 2000s, past the end of the millennium, and you begin to see income growth actually driving malnutrition in many places. And why is that? It's because there's kind of a transition. It's lots of factors, but there's a transition from deprivation, households not having enough to eat, governments worrying about hunger, because hunger is still with us, but we've made a lot of progress on hunger in the last 20 years, don't get me wrong. But that transition has sort of left people with the mindset of, well, more food is better. And so we've become more sedentary. The foods that we consume have become less whole foods, so there's more ultra highly processed foods. Processed foods,
junk food.
Processed food is not bad. Think of tinned food and dried food and salted food. That's not bad. It's the highly processed food that you don't even know what it's come from. Twinkie bars, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah, junk food. So that's become more available to people as incomes grow. The prices have gone down because they're all basically staple-based, cereal-based. And so prices of cereals have come down. The ability to move food around has become better. Plastics have been used more. People have less time to cook now, so they want convenience, they want packaged foods. And all of this stuff has just led to more and more of the wrong kinds of foods being consumed. And these foods are so highly refined, they don't actually send signals to our appetite mechanism to say slow down. Whole foods are very bulky. They have a lot of stuff in them, and they say to your appetite mechanism, stop now.
Yeah, I mean, you can't eat 3 bananas. I mean, it's just the fact. I mean, you might be able, but I certainly can't. You know, it's just you get full.
Yeah.
You know, but then you can easily go through like how many packets of biscuits or chips or whatever it is, because they're designed to be munched. Now, what about Indonesia itself? Because we have gone in the last couple of decades, obviously, we used to be sort of like the third world country. You know, this is where people are thin and they eat very, you know, basic things like, you know, but now as we are becoming sort of like a middle income country, there is clearly a pattern of diet and lifestyle that is actually creating its own problems. It used to be when we're sick, well, now we still, you know, because of the viruses, but it used to be from communicable diseases. But now you have, Indonesia is one of the highest sort of diabetes, you know, we're full of, we have a lot of diabetes and hypertension, you know, high blood pressure and high cholesterol and so on and so forth. So what actually went wrong when it comes to our own knowledge about food and nutrition itself? I mean, what's the science of it? Because I think this is, you know.
It's interesting if you look at the science and you look at the causes of obesity and overweight, and you look at a map with all the arrows on it. There are thousands of arrows. It's really complicated. Partly it's down to individual choice. Now, a lot of governments that don't want to do much about this say it's all down to individual choice.
But is it really though?
No, it's not. It's about the environment we face. When you go to any event or any motel or hotel or anything like that, you'll see junk food in front of you. And it's hard to resist. There used to be a UN agency that had a canteen until about 10 years ago. And it was an agency that cared about good nutrition, and its own canteen was full of junk food. So the environment that we face constrains our choices. If it costs a huge amount of money to buy a cup of fruit, then and it costs 1/10 of that to buy a bag of potato chips, that's what we do. So the science is complicated. Changing behavior is really complicated. We are hardwired as human beings to want salt, to want sugar. But if the form of the salt and the sugar comes, then it doesn't suppress the appetite, we just keep doing it.
But what about the cultural aspect to begin with? For example, you know, I grew up on you eat, you know, sweet potato, or you have corn on the cob or whatever. And there was a moment when burgers and all these pizzas and pastas and the fried chicken and whatnot came into the country, and these were like really expensive and desirable, and people kind of you know, eat that on a, you know, maybe once a month. But now suddenly they become a lot cheaper. You know, are we becoming sort of very much influenced also by the way we eat because of some kind of food colonialism, if I would say? Because, you know, this junk food was not created in this part of the world, but now, like you said, you know, obesity is becoming the big thing. So
definitely Western diets have somehow attained this status of key aspiration. You're modern if you consume burgers and fried chicken. So we have to counter that. I don't know if that was a deliberate strategy or ploy. It certainly was about a bid to get market share and expand market share
Well,
by
it's
these
all about
companies.
profit, isn't it? Because of the
Exactly.
advertising that goes with it.
Exactly. You know, whether those companies knew their products were so detrimental to human health, I don't know. Maybe they did. But I think there was a, you know, there's kind of like a, boiling frog analogy. You don't
realize that you're boiled until
exactly.
you're already
it's too late
dead.
to jump out, right? And I think the science, there was a bit of a blind spot in the science for about 10 years, and we didn't realize what was happening to us. And then by the time that happened, it was kind of so difficult to change behavior.
Isn't this something that's worrying you? Because since the food industry, the food system is very much kind of not only organized but controlled by the food, the major food producers, and there are only so few of them. That's the one aspect. And the other thing is, going back to the science of it, it's about this the sugar and the fat. It used to be, fat was demonized and said, no, you mustn't eat fat. You have to don't eat butter. You eat margarine because fat causes, heart attack and so on. And now it's sugar. Fat's okay, but not too much sugar. But then, of course, we're all addicted to sugar after how many years of having this brainwashing in our head about how bad fat is.
Yeah.
Everything has sugar in it and salt. I mean, is this something that I think it's really
it's a massive problem. I mean, first of all, we don't really measure what we eat very well. So you get these studies in the news every week. Chocolate is good for you. Next week, chocolate is bad for you. Wine is good for you. Wine is bad for you. So the science of nutrition is really difficult for normal, regular, everyday people to interpret. And I think food companies exploit that. Second thing is there is too much concentration in the food industry. It's very highly concentrated. I don't quite know how that is broken up, but I think that's a major issue for governments to look at. Third thing is we as a world, and I think this country as well, rely on a very small number of foods, a handful of foods. I think it's something like 7 crops and 3 animal products that are responsible for 75% of the world's food. That is very dangerous and very, that helps the companies concentrate, and it's just bad for biodiversity and all sorts of things. So I think I think governments can be much more activist in taking on businesses.
But isn't this something that GAIN should also, do you take on, food industry, saying...
We call out bad behavior when we see it. We work with there's a metric that's called the Access to Nutrition Index that looks at the 22 big companies and calls them out on how good they are for nutrition or how bad they are for nutrition. That came out of GAIN. So we call the big companies out on whether they're doing bad stuff. We communicate with the governments and we give the governments ideas of things they could do, whether it's a ban on advertisements or whether it's standards for reformulation of food, or whether it's getting adverts out of games that adolescents use, or whether it's clearer labeling. I was just at Super Indo this morning.
But clear labeling.
Yes,
but then if you don't understand how to read the label and what's on the label, all these numbers.
Well, Super Indo is really interesting. They've come up with a 5-color chart for sugar. So white is no sugar, dark blue is the worst. And it's very clear. You go in and they've only had it for 700 of their 20,000 products in the store. But you look at it, it's very clear.
Well, that's good. I think that's a very important point, because you look at the label, they're really small. You have to use a magnifying glass to read it, and when you read it, you don't understand what it says. You have all sorts of things that the lay people can't understand. It's easier to have like a traffic light, red, only eat this maybe once a year on your birthdays or something, and then the green, eat this all the time. That would make it
My
easier.
kids buy me donuts once a year, my birthday. Yes, no, absolutely. So then you can go in and say, well, you look at your basket, I've got all reds and yellows. There's a problem.
And look at your plate,
exactly.
and see how.
No, I think it's. I think it's coming. It's coming.
Education, obviously, the key, which is where I think we should talk about, Lawrence, how to make people understand, what it is that they're eating, make sure that it is nutritious. Kita break lagi, Insight with Desi Anwar akan segera kembali, tetaplah bersama kami. Masih bersama Insight with Desi Anwar. Dengan saya di studio ada Executive Director of Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition atau GAY, Haddad Lawrence. Very interesting but very disturbing as well, because I know that you said, we should be educated also on the kind of choices, the food choices that, which is good for us. But it's difficult, like you said, if the environment actually doesn't support it. For example, like when you go to supermarket, you have like the shelves full of all these processed food, packaged food with, all sorts of things in it, the colorings, the preservatives, the additives, and the whatnots, which are clearly not good for us, I'm sure. And it's actually getting more and more difficult to have access to fresh food. Now, just in a country like Indonesia, where we have an abundance of everything here, everything grows, and yet it's easier, for example, to import apples from China than it is to, we have so many different types of fruits in Indonesia, but people are not eating the kind of fruits that I used to eat as a child, for example. And we have so many different types of grains, and not just your regular white rice. But what is it about our current food system that makes it easier and cheaper to buy packaged stuff that are made in factories, than it is to just get stuff that's growing off the ground? And this is not just in Indonesia, it's globally. It's getting to the point where you want to be healthy and eat only fresh foods, and it's actually a lot more expensive then.
So, great question, Desi. There's been a move lately to move into the idea of food systems. So what is a food system? It's a bunch of choices that people make about what to grow, where to grow it, how to process it, how to store it, how to consume it, how to prepare it, and so on. So it's a bunch of choices from farm to fork, if you like. Mm-hmm. And it gives you, what does that do? You get lots of pretty diagrams, but actually it gives you a whole series of intervention points. Mm-hmm. So at GAIN, we like to look at things from three different angles: the supply side, the demand side, and the enabling environment mm-hmm. side. So on the supply side, what can we do to get more fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, fresh products in general? So on the supply side, governments have lots of things they can do. For example, they can procure these foods for their schools, for their health systems, for their social security programs. A lot of governments don't, and I'm not talking about expensive foods, I'm talking about pulses, beans, peas, millets. These are things that they could do. It sends a powerful signal to the private sector as well. Second thing, on the supply side, agricultural research and development in the state. Most countries' governments still focus most of their research and development on rice and wheat and maize. Hardly any on vegetables, fruits, pulses. They think the private sector will take care of it. Well, newsflash, they don't. So the state has to do that. That's on the supply side. On the demand side, most of the demand campaigns that are run by the public sector are pretty hopeless. They're very left brain. They tend to focus on logic and science, which is good, but they
as long as it's the right science.
If it's the right science, yes. That's another issue we could talk about. But yes, the arguments usually go, you should eat this because it's good for you. And my own kids just roll their eyes when I say stuff like that to them, and they're probably right to. So the public sector campaigns need to be more aspirational. They need to use more emotions, more colour. So that's very important. And we work a lot with governments to do that. We also work a lot, still on the demand side, with youth. Youth, very important. Very important because this is when a lot of dietary patterns, a lot of attitudes towards food are set. Youth can also educate their families and their communities. Youth are future voters. They are future consumers.
And this is also what GAIN does.
We work a lot with youth in Indonesia. We have a Health Heroes campaign where we mobilize. Actually, we don't mobilize, they mobilize. We just support and facilitate.
And it's been going well so far.
It's going really well. It's basically articulating their priorities of youth, but also saying what they can do in their schools, in their community centres, in their families, and on social media. So there's a bunch of things you can do on the demand side, and the enabling environment side. It's about data. It's about policy. So you have to do all of these things in a food system. Most journalists will say to me, "What's the one thing we can do to fix this?" And I'll say, "Stop asking that question, because there isn't one thing you do. You need to do 20 things, but you need to do it within a coherent framework."
But is this something that you find the government, particularly government of Indonesia, doing? Are they incorporating it in their policy?
Government has a really good food system transformation plan. It came out of the UN summit of last year. The challenge now is to implement it.
Yeah, well, the challenge now, I mean, if you look at Indonesia now, you know, especially we supposedly have this demographic bonus now, which means there are more people in a productive age. But these are also, I was looking at the numbers you did, that's where the obesity is, you know, that kind of the productive age, and yet there are more of the obesity in that range. And at the same time, we have, particularly in the eastern part of Indonesia, cases of stunting, where, you know, children are born underweight and then they will grow up and become, you know, healthy adults. But at the same time, we also have anemia cases of where, you know, and then you have the people with, well, a lot of Indonesians have diabetes and, you know, are hypertensive. They have high blood pressure, and smoking. I mean, at some point, it's just that there's a gap. There's a gap between what's out there and given to people to consume, and then the knowledge about it, and then the fact that what these things are actually causing, which is diseases, which is a burden to the health system. You know, I'm interested in underlying causes. Do you think it's that modernity and, you know, globalization and capitalism actually makes us, as humans, very unhealthy people? I mean, does it have to be that
It doesn't
trend?
have to be. There's nothing
Because
inevitable.
this is a global thing.
There's nothing inevitable about malnutrition in all of its forms. I used to work with a head of a planning commission, not in Indonesia, in another Asian country, who would say, "This is like a curse." And I would say, "It's not a curse. You can do something about it." It does require action on multiple fronts. All of the forms of malnutrition that you talked about, you mentioned, have healthy diets at the core of them. That's the way to beat them. What is a healthy diet? How do you get it? As I said, you have to focus on the supply, make the supply of nutritious food more attractive, make the demand more attractive, and make the enabling environment more positive. I think global drivers, urbanization, globalization, aging, all of these drivers have pushed us towards where we are right now. But we haven't paid enough attention to them. Governments haven't realized how important. They haven't realized that food choices are wrecking health systems. They haven't realized food choices are wrecking environmental systems. They haven't realized that the science is very clear now. If you look at Indonesia, the burden of disease in Indonesia, which is mortality plus premature mortality plus morbidity.
That's why we have a lot of death during COVID, because of comorbidity.
Yeah, exactly. You look at the drivers, 5 of the top 10 are diet related. Alcohol's there, pollution's there, drugs are there, tobacco's there, but the other ones are all diet related.
And also that we are all eating the same food now. I mean, it used to be you have like, you know, hundreds of fruits and food and grains and beans to choose from, but now it's only like, you know, it's just the, you know, the apples and bananas, and it's just the rice, and then it's just the, you know, it's the wheat.
We have a program in Tanzania. We have a lot of work in Tanzania, and I was in Tanzania recently, and Tanzania has a massive problem with iron deficiency, especially for women, especially for young girls, and we're always looking for cheap sources of iron in food, inexpensive, and there's this fantastic green leafy vegetable everywhere. And I was saying to my Tanzanian colleagues who are experts in Tanzania, what's going on? Why aren't we producing this and eating this? Why? And they said parents and grandchildren used to consume it, but today, the adolescents today think it's goat's food.
Yep,
so,
absolutely.
So the challenge there is to make that sexy again. How do you make that sexy?
We have one more segment, Lawrence. So tetaplah bersama Insight with Desi Anwar. Kami akan segera kembali. Masih bersama Insight with Desi Anwar, saya bersama Executive Director Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition atau GAIN, Lawrence Haddad. This is our last segment, and just your thoughts on looking forward, obviously, in terms of the future's pretty grim, probably more viruses, more conflicts, and of course the threats of climate change. Now, when it comes to eating a nutritious food, for example, as countries get richer, obviously, you know, they want to have more meat, more of the kind of stuff that they couldn't afford, you know, but their parents maybe couldn't afford, more kind of things that are farm produce and milk and dairy and meat and so on and so forth. But as we know that they say that the meat industry is one of the major causes of, you know, greenhouse gases. It's a big contributor to climate change. Just this whole idea of, you know, the climate change being a man-made thing, you know, how do we reconcile in the future when it comes to making healthy choices, not just for our bodies, but also for the environment and for the planet as a whole?
So you're quite right. I think that the next 10 or 20 years is going to be characterized by shocks. Climate change is ratcheting everything up. There will be more conflict. There will be more diseases, for sure, coming on. So we have to, the first thing we have to do is make diversity our friend. Whenever you enter into an uncertain terrain, diversity is the insurance policy. So that means diversity in what foods are grown, which we talked about. More, let's get back to more neglected foods, more traditional foods, more
local
orphan
stuff.
foods, and more local foods. Diversity in value chains. There were very long global value chains that got disrupted by COVID and Ukraine. Let's have a better balance of the longer ones, which we still need, and shorter, more local ones. More biodiversity and more different ways of producing food, not just industrial production. Sometimes you need that, but more often than not, you don't. We just got into the habit of it, and path dependency is very big. More diversity on what people eat. Diet diversity is still very poor in most places in the world. So diversity is the first part of my answer. The second part is it really causes me heartburn, the climate and nutrition nexus, because they're actually, climate and nutrition are very good bedfellows. They're very aligned. At a global level, it kind of makes sense. Eat less meat, eat more plants. It's good for your health. It's good for the planet. Because
go back to our Stone Age ancestors, you know.
But
paleo diet is becoming the thing now, you know.
One of my former bosses said to me, yeah, no one lives on average. If I've got my head in the oven and my feet in the refrigerator, my body temperature on average is probably about right, but I'm not in a very comfortable place. So what we need here is a bit of nuance. So when many, even let's say take Indonesia, in many places in Indonesia, animal food consumption, meat, eggs, dairy, chicken, is higher than the recommended daily allowances or guidance.
Because it's more abundant as well.
So reduce. But many populations, malnourished kids, adolescent girls, actually need more of these kinds of foods because they have vitamins and minerals that are highly bioavailable. The body can use them easily. In plants, these vitamins and minerals are often tied up by things called phytates. So they're in there, but your body can't access them. So it's very nuanced on the health side. And on the environment side, it's also very nuanced because there are some animal source foods that are very methane and CO2 producing, some not. Even for the same food, different ways of producing that have very different greenhouse gas emissions. And it gets even more complicated because greenhouse gases aren't the only thing we care about when it comes to the environment. There's water use, there's land use, there's nitrogen, there's phosphorus. And animal source foods are not the most, don't have the biggest environmental footprint in these other 5 dimensions.
Although we are using land to grow food for the animals, that's also the thing,
that is
right?
also absolutely
with
the case.
Monoculture and things like that, that actually degrades and reduces our opportunities for variety and diversity.
So we need more evidence. Most of the evidence about trade-offs between nutrition, climate, environment come from Europe and North America, in European and North American context. That's another example of potential colonization. Research done there being taken as gospel here. We need more Indonesian researchers and universities to be doing that kind of research. We know a lot about the causes of malnutrition. We now need to know more about the solutions and more about how the solutions align with climate, because the climate lobby is very strong right now. Governments are very focused on it, most of them, less focused on nutrition and food. So we need to align, not because nutrition is seeking to get all the resources from climate, but I think nutrition has a lot to offer climate. Food systems produce a third of the greenhouse gas emissions, for example.
But Lawrence, and maybe this food system and farmers growing food, sometimes these things just don't, they don't gel. You have poor farmers, growing crops, and then the people buying them from supermarkets, and they're quite expensive because the food system makes fresh produce expensive, maybe because they need to travel and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there's this global food industry that brings, a lot of food onto the supermarket shelves, and very affordable, very cheap, but not very nutritious. I mean, is this something that how do you strategize in making sure that it should be cheaper for us to eat produce grown locally as opposed to buying imported stuff because it's actually cheaper?
We want farmers to earn a decent wage and decent living, and we want consumers to be able to afford healthy foods. Those two things are difficult to reconcile. The way to reconcile them is to make moving food from here to here, from farm to market to consumer, cheaper. That means better infrastructure. It means fewer middlemen and middlewomen, and it means better market information. I think those three things are coming, but they're not going to come without government catalytic investment. Governments have to see this as a problem, and they have to be brave, and they have to constrain the businesses. The businesses will say, hey, leave me alone. We're not breaking the law.
Absolutely.
We're generating income.
Taxes,
we're paying taxes. We're generating jobs. Leave us alone. Some of the companies are more progressive, and they see doing the right thing as a way of positioning themselves at the front of the pack, attracting the best employees, attracting future consumers, attracting the media plaudits, but they're in a minority.
Okay, finally, with our time's running out, just very quickly again, what are the kind of things and initiatives that you are and you will be doing with Indonesia for this year and the next few years going ahead? Share with us some of the
we're working with adolescents to mobilize them so that they can express their views and concerns to governments, to businesses. We're educating them as well.
Do they care about food? Do you find adolescents
they care deeply because they care mostly on the environment, but we use that. They care about the environment because they're the ones that are going to have to be subjected to extremes of weather.
It's their future.
It's their future. But we latch on to that and we say, but did you also know that these foods that have a lower environmental footprint usually, not always, usually are healthier food? Did you know the food industry is pulling the wool over your eyes about this is a healthy food? No, it's not a healthy food. It has the word juice on the box, doesn't mean it's juice, So they care, and they have more power than they think they do.
So you educate them on this?
We educate them, we help them organize, and we help them message and mobilize and act. We say, this is what you can do. You can do this in your schools. You can do this in your homes.
And you're involving how many adolescents in Indonesia?
Oh, thousands and thousands.
And what else are you doing? Because we do have that laundry list of things that we have, the obesity, anemia.
The second thing we're doing is food loss. We want to minimize food loss for nutritious food. So I gave you the example of fish. We're doing a lot more. We're broadening it out to other nutritious foods, involving small and medium enterprises, because that's really key. We're also working a lot at the community level, still trying to get this emo-demo,
I love that.
Emotional demonstration. It's in, I think, about 30 districts, regencies. It can go easily to 514.
And you just started, is that just?
It started about 3 years ago. We did 5, and then we moved to 30, and we now need to work with the Ministry of Health to scale that up.
You've seen positive results?
Oh, yes. External results from the University of Sydney show very positive impacts on diet diversity.
Okay, great. And Any last words, perhaps, on your trip to Indonesia? Who have you seen you talking about and influencing, and also, just making sure that everybody's eating good food, because there's so much good food here in Indonesia. I'm not entirely sure whether they're healthy, but they're certainly very tasty.
Yes, it's very tasty. I'm watching my weight when I'm here. No, I think Indonesia's great strength. I mean, it has lots and lots of strengths, but the diversity is a really massive strength. Diversity of cultures, contexts, and foods, and you must make that diversity work hard, I think, for the country. The other thing about the diversity is that there will be some regencies and cities that are doing better than others, and so we need to learn from those bright spots. And what can we all learn? So you have that ability to do that.
Although it doesn't mean just because you have better income and better educated that you're actually healthier. It depends on the food choices you make.
It depends on individual choices, government choices, business choices.
Okay.
All of us have a power on our plate.
Do you stick to a good diet, Lawrence? You
reasonably,
cut down on meat?
Reasonably so. Cut
vegetarian,
down on meat.
but now vegan is a thing, right?
I'm not vegetarian, but I cut down on meat, have more fish, less red meat, more chicken, more vegetables, more
and your
fruits.
children, are they conscious about stuff?
Can we pass that question, please? Working on it.
Yeah, well, no snackings, no junk food, stay away.
Portion control is very important too.
Yes.
Portion sizes are very big, they don't need to be.
And don't forget the exercise, it's very important. Thank you very much for your insight. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and good luck with all the projects and the hard work that you're doing.
Thank you, Desi. The media is so important to get the message out. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Demikian Insight with Desi Anwar kali ini. Anda juga dapat menyaksikan tayangan ini di cnnindonesia.com dan YouTube CNN Indonesia Insight with Desi Anwar. Sampai jumpa, stay safe, bye-bye.